So we're harvesting a little bit here as we're wrapping up this conversation tied into the Evolutionary Leadership Community that was is co-convened by Fyodor Ovchinnikov and Manuel Manga. And Fyodor was going to offer us a few parting thoughts before he needs to move on.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Yeah, and I feel like this conversation is really just sampling. So I really would love to keep thinking, like Bertola said, that he'll be reflecting on one of my questions. You know, I'll be reflecting on what I've heard from everybody and what came up to me in this conversation. So thank you for that. I think it's just the beginning of certain, or continuation of something that started before, and then also the beginning of something that will continue beyond this call. Some highlights for me is, so we touched a little bit on patterns across different places, and Bertolo shared some of his international experience. I guess he's traveling in person, and I noticed something by interacting with a lot of people that come to the Bay Area, and also with all of you online. To me, one of the biggest questions here is inadequacy of support systems for local initiatives that are systemic and that are transformational, and the problem begins when they collide with the mainstream structures that were supposed to support them, and they declare the same goals but have different mental models, narratives, and there is a clash that is not working in the favor of local initiatives at some point. So that's why we, besides personal transformation and awakening, to me the question is, how do we change this cultural context and institutional context so that this personal awakening becomes kind of reinforced by the cultural context rather than blocked by this cultural context. We also touched a little bit about the personal income streams and how to survive economically in the current reality by doing the work. We all shared some either access to finances that are unrestricted, like inheritance, for example, or spending part of our time on work that we might not necessarily like writing reports, right? Or maybe just doing work that we like, that pays us well. But my particular point was that it will probably never be enough. We will always need to do work that is not paid for to fully do whatever we can to maximize the impact. So my strategy, for example, is to maximize the economic value of maybe 10 to 20 hours per week in a way that allows me to spend all the other time in a way that's most impactful and still get income on this 10, 20 hours a week in a way that is aligned with the general work I'm doing. So these are just some highlights from me.
Thanks, Fyodor, and we continued our conversation a little bit after you left and are now wrapping up with some additional closing thoughts. It's been really interesting to have the Nordic perspective in the room today, and it seems I have this kind of idealized fantasy of what goes on in the Nordic countries, that you're so far ahead of the rest of the world, so much more enlightened, so much more humane. And it was really interesting to hear Bertola suggest that some of the stuff he's seeing in Ghana feels far more, advanced in terms of things like implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, or better uses of technology than what you're seeing where you are. Although no place is perfect, to be sure. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, like I said, a really interesting conversation. And I think this is like the first step of a long conversation that we've been like having, but we need to like accelerate and have a lot more of with a lot more of people. And like what I can feel when traveling to places, especially with Batola, is that people who didn't talk about this kind of subjects 2 years ago are now talking about them. So there is a shift here in the Nordics, at least, and some are on networks here. So there's a very big shift. But on the same time, I try to make very conscious effort to meet people outside my bubble and go everywhere. And I can see that this conversation are not even beginning in some places where it actually need to begin, like in our institutions here in Sweden, that you say some people have an idolized view of. And for me, what I've been exploring the fort during maybe the two to three latest years, that we need a new type of profession and institution and role in society that can handle a complex society to this, like this. And that's why I came up with the title Captain Future, and that's why me and Bert-Olof formed the Future Navigators. That navigator is a person who navigates a complex society, and there can be hundreds of different different types of navigators. And I came in contact with Ashok, and they call these people weaving the network society. And that's very interesting. And there are also like some people call out for sense makers and wisdom seekers. And this is also a role and a process that is very lacking in our society, that we actually need like a fairly large part of our society actually doing. So my thinking is that I don't know, a lot of cities have like they have a commercial office where companies can go and get help, and there's a library in most cities, but there's no institution there where you can go help and navigate the complex society, even as a private person or as a company or an organization. And for me, that's what we need, like a hub or an office somewhere in a city that can help people navigate. My idea is that we can use libraries as a building, because they're already built in all cities, and we just have to transform the rule and employ new people there. And that's things I'm trying to pitch to people when I go around. And that is an idea I'm forwarding. And I talked a lot with Ross Hall about this when I met him in Oslo last month. He is the one driving the Ashoka Weaver Academy, like to find out a way how we can train what they call weavers, but that is also a part of people we need a lot more of in our society. And you mentioned like this mainstream insanity. I'm very taken by the book The Seventh Sense. I don't know if you have heard of it. The Joshua Cooper Ramo, he calls the ability we have to have now is what he calls the seventh sense, the ability to make sense of what's going on in a network global society. That is opposed to what many people call the insanity challenge. Like, how do we stay afloat and ahead of a changing curve to actually make the transformation needed so we don't go to hell? So.
Amen. Well, I want to help you build that. What was the term you used for the support structure for the
Weaver, navigators, sense makers, and wisdom seekers. Those are things. We should use all four names so people don't get too confused what it is.
You were imagining a kind of a set of support structures, like we have incubators for businesses, right?
Yeah.
Libraries can be a focus of that. So I'm excited. I'm going to be doing some work with libraries across New England, actually, all climate change conversations and what could come out of them. So we should keep talking for sure.
I had this I didn't speak about earlier, but it came to my mind that we had a lot of conversations today about transactional views or not transactional views, or like a dualistic. You have two ways, the old institutions and something new happening. And the last days I was together with a guy, Rehan Alawala from Pakistan. And we have spent some days here. It's very interesting to see a person coming from like Pakistan to the heart of the Nordics. Very different context. And on the one hand, we have these universities and big ideas about transformation, how we can work together with universities and civil society. And then he pitched the idea there that well, in Pakistan or in India, we have several 100 million people who can't even write their own name on a paper. So when we sit here then with a few thousand people and have ideas about transformation of the world, and then we have this picture at the same time. So yeah, if we are going to build a future society, what can we do and what are our possibilities to do that? I needed to shift location a bit there. Some people entered. Yes, it's just some reflections there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important not to forget about that whole tranche of society. Of course, they do know how to talk to one another. And many of them may have smartphones, even if they can't write, too. I think increasingly, which is kind of amazing, right? Even among the poor people.
Exactly. That at the same time, because they use mobile and the new technologies, but
right.
Yeah, we are a very interesting time.
That's part of what this process is holds potential for, is that each of these small group conversations get knit together into a larger one. Not only can they happen at different times and with different configurations of people, they can happen in different languages. But as long as we're able to translate into a common language to make meaning, privileged that English seems to be the one right now, we have the ability to connect with a process pattern like this, with a very diverse group potentially. This particular iteration hasn't been so diverse, at least not across global north versus south or racial and economic dimensions, perhaps. But anyway, Ken, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I want to say something, and I want to be really careful that I don't do any kind of make a bad assumption here. But when I hear that Sweden is inviting Ghana to come and help teach you guys, it
Norway.
gladdens my heart. I'm sorry, what?
It was Norway, but yeah, always said the same.
Don't mean to. I know there's a big rivalry there. So it gladdens my heart because my assumption is that Ghana is still very much closer to its indigenous roots than westernized and industrialized countries. And I think that there's an enormous overlooked potential for healing in indigenous cultures around the world. There's a storehouse of how to get along with people, how to set priorities, how to be connected to nature that I think a lot of us who've been schooled in the West or in the industrialized North have lost touch with. Not that it can't be recovered, but I just don't think it's part of our being. And I'm sitting here drinking a cup of tea, and I look, the tea bag has a little fortune on the back of it, and I happen to look at the one that I just put in. It says, one touch of nature makes the whole world kin. William Shakespeare. And I just thought, wow, we're looking at if there's one thing that there's growing agreement on, it has to do with the changes in nature, with climate change, with floods and fires and storms and things. And so nature is very definitely touching us, and I think that is actually evoking a sense of kinship among people. Of we have to find a way to calm this down and keep our planet livable and habitable for ourselves. So it's hopeful to me that we've had this call, and I've learned some things, and I had no idea Sweden was building bunkers, but I'd love to come and visit. And
it's kind of a joke, but we make it we joke about it in a virtual sense. I don't know if you read the article by Rushkov when he talked to the rich Americans who was building real bunkers. So we made a virtual joke about building impact bunkers instead of shelter bunkers.
Okay. I am aware of the seed bunker that got inundated with meltwater, which is terrible. But I have been I was in Sweden once in 2001, 2 weeks after 9/11, as a matter of fact. And I really enjoyed being there. I grew up in New England, and so I was talking to somebody about the similarities in the coastline. I said, oh yeah, same architect, same designer, So
design the coastline.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for inviting me on this call today. It's been a pleasure to hang out with you guys.
Yes, thank you all.